The 2024 GOP presidential primary field is shrinking. South Carolina Senator Tim Scott dropped out of the race last night in a decision that even left his own staff shocked. There are now a total of 7 candidates running for president. The former president, Donald Trump, continues to lead the pack, though, by a wide margin in the polls. So for more on this, I want to bring in CBS News political director Fin Gómez. So, I don't know, Fin, I sounded like you right there for a second.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
I guess it's not, even though his staff seemed to be surprised, I wasn't particularly surprised that he was dropping out. I mean,
Donald Trump called it on SNL.
Yeah, he did.
He said, what's lower than 1%?
Most of these candidates are just single digits in the polls, including Scott. But what are you hearing about why he decided to call it quits now?
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, it caught a lot of multiple sources told us that it caught them by surprise. He revealed it live on Fox News in that interview with Trey Gowdy, and many of his staff didn't know, and they weren't aware until he actually said it, essentially. They were in shock, is what we were told. But if you do look at the polls, if you do look, even our poll that showed him at like 4%, in a national poll among likely Republican voters, he barely made the last debate stage. There was some controversy over that from DeSantis' camp. There was some criticism saying that the RNC sort of shifted the criteria so he can make the stage. His fundraising numbers were strong. He had some money, but if he didn't make that debate stage, the next debate in Alabama, it could be quite embarrassing. However, that his support, where does it go? It's more pronounced, I think, if you look at Nikki Haley, his fellow South Carolinian, right? The former governor of South Carolina. They have some of the same donor base and some of the same support, frankly, from South Carolina. So what the Nikki Haley camp is expecting is that they can generate some momentum of that Scott support going to them. So that's something to keep an eye on.
Trump was campaigning in New Hampshire over the weekend. He called the 2024 election, quote, our final battle. Let's listen to a bit of his speech.
With you at my side, and you've been at my side from the beginning, we will demolish the deep state. We will throw off the sick political class that hates our country. We will rout the fake news media until they become real. We will evict Joe Biden from the White House, and we will finish the job that we started.
So nothing really new there. It sounds like typical Trump speech. But in that interview that he gave to Univision with Enrico Acevedo, Trump, I think, more than before, crystallized, Finney, what he expects to do should he win the presidency again. And it was pretty frightening. Just break down for our viewers what he said that he would do should he be elected president.
Yeah, specifically in that interview with Enrique Acevedo, who's also a CBS News contributor, he said that the weaponization, what is he and his team called the weaponization of the Department of Justice with these trials, these investigations, that it could happen, quote, in reverse, and that by their actions now, by these investigations, they have, quote, unleashed the genie out of the box. Essentially, that it could happen if he's elected or another Republican is elected because they've established this, what they say is a political calculation and why they're going after him. And it falls into line with what we've heard many times from him before, that this is a political witch hunt, so on and so forth. So we did it here at the most pronounced, he said it the most pronounced way, I believe, within in that interview with Enrique about what he would do and how he would target perhaps some of those Biden officials and political opponents from the other side.
Republican presidential candidate Chris Christie visited Israel over the weekend. I'm curious, I know what he said he was doing, which is, if you want to lead the country, you got to be on the ground to see what's happening in real life. But I'm curious what you believe he was kind of hoping to accomplish with a trip like this.
I think he's trying to get a little bit of attention, frankly. He's made the U.S. having a bigger role in global positioning and strategy overall. That's been part of his platform, frankly. But if you look at him, if you look at his polling in recent weeks and recent months, he really hasn't captured a lot of momentum. He's still, earlier you said, Anne-Marie, about those, folks in the 1%. That's where he is essentially. But he is the first Republican presidential hopeful to go to Israel since the Hamas attack on October 7th. So I think that by doing that, he has gotten some attention, and he's hoping for some potential momentum, especially in New Hampshire, where he's focused a lot of his campaign strategy on.
Let's talk about President Biden. We saw polls last week from CBS News, also the New York Times. We also talked about it last week. But this has a lot to do with his hopes for re-election. And now this morning, Politico is reporting similarly concerning numbers. Again, the more interesting reporting that I saw over the weekend was written in Puck Magazine and not Puck Magazine,
the newsletter.
Puck newsletter, yeah. And Finn, I know you read it.
I do.
And there, what I thought was fascinating is the Democrats are all seeing these poll numbers and feeling like it's a 5-alarm fire. And the only people that don't seem to be as concerned, or at least they're not on the surface, are people who work for Joe Biden.
Of course.
Right? And that's to be expected. But, Finn, how do you read it? I mean, does it feel to you and to your sources, everybody in Washington, D.C., that David Axelrod, who's a respected political analyst, worked for Barack Obama, has suggested delicately that perhaps Biden should not run for re-election.
But we should, even though we talked about it last week, we should tell people sort of overall, the overarching kind of theme for a lot of these polls is, and Finn, you can kind of correct my characterization, is a general lack of enthusiasm for President Biden.
And both candidates, in fact, right?
Yes. But the challenge for President Biden is certainly, when you look at the most recent election on Tuesday, is it certainly seems like issues that are of interest to the Democrats, that's winning.
Right.
Democrats in general are winning, but President Biden in particular is suffering from a lack of enthusiasm.
And the campaign, and why, and this is Tara Palmieri writing in Puck, why I think it's interesting, Finn, is that last week, some Democrats suggested to her that the Biden people were taking a victory lap, suggesting, look, the president is popular, right? Look at all the wins we had. But they're saying what you're saying. No, it had to do with the issues. And they won in spite of President Biden. So what are you hearing?
I mean, honestly, I don't think I have to say anything. You guys, you guys said it perfectly, but I did talk to some senior Biden officials over the weekend, and frankly, one of the things that they told me was, quote, that everybody in the Democratic Party that it might be a little concerned needs to, quote, calm down, because essentially it's only a year out. There's still a lot that they haven't done yet. They haven't really started. They haven't initiated it. However, this sort of does light a fire in the sense that it's initiating some mobilization and others to be galvanized that about for Democrats the potential possibility of a Republican in the White House, possibly Trump. If you look at these numbers and these head-to-head hypothetical matchups, so when these polls initially came out, especially that New York Times Siena College poll that showed him down in 5 out of 6 battleground states. After that, there was this resurgence, the sense of confidence that came back after the elections last Tuesday, where we saw, some big Democratic wins, as you said, in Ohio, especially, that trended Republican for cycles because of abortion rights. There was a big win for the Democrats, right? And so they're looking, also in Virginia, also in Kentucky. So they see that not as evidence as that the president is unpopular. He does have unpopular poll ratings right now, but that these core issues that are important to their core base can galvanize their voters, especially abortion rights, especially that we saw that in the midterms last year. So they're hoping on that. We can confirm that Biden's campaign team briefed the president, the first lady, and the vice president, including senior White House aides, last Friday on the rest of the calendar and organization and advertising and messaging. The president, we've been told, will be focusing more on Donald Trump. But there's also this frustration that that voters don't understand essentially or grasp that he's had these legislative wins and accomplishments. So they're trying to recalibrate and focus and try to get their message out. There's going to be spending more money on ads. They're going to have more surrogates out. They're going to have the Vice President Harris out more, and even some members of his family, I'm told, including the First Lady, out on the campaign trail, be more of a surrogate to kind of focus and recalibrate and try to mobilize their base. So again, it's, and again, they say we're a year out. There's a lot to do. We have time.
All right, Fin Gómez, always great to talk to you, brother. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.